Good afternoon, everybody. So the invitation that went out for today's webinar talked about the media fragmentation and how in today's fragmented media world, there are over 400 TV networks, 7,000 magazine titles, and countless websites available where consumers can get content and advertising. But in this world full of page views and ratings, eyeballs and click streams, how can you know that your message is really resonating with your target? Simmons Consumer Media Engagement study goes beyond audience ratings and clickstream data to delve into the why and how of consumers' engagement with the media. We note that advertising recall, brand recall don't explain engagement. Neither does loyalty or usage frequently. But what we do is we measure engagement with media via cognitive, behavioral, and emotional dimensions. The Simmons Consumer Media Engagement Study answers why and in what ways are consumers engaged with a particular media vehicle. It measures is engagement consistent for media brands that deliver content across multiple delivery channels. Now, does engagement really matter? And does it create a positive halo effect for brand advertisers? The Consumer Media Engagement Study is an online study that measures engagement to specific media vehicles or properties by asking for a response on a 5-point Likert scale to each of up to 35 statements, depending on whether the media property is a TV network or program, magazine, or an internet website. Respondents may rate up to 20 properties. That includes 10 TV programs or networks, 5 magazine titles, and 5 internet sites. And the 5 points of the scale that we use are very descriptive, descriptive, somewhat descriptive, slightly descriptive, and not at all descriptive. So for this webinar, we're going to be looking at the top 2 boxes for our statements. So to explain a little bit about what's on this page, the statements on this page are what we call our global set of statements. So these are asked across all 3 types of media, TV, magazines, and internet. They fall under these dimensions. So there's inspirational questions that this inspires me in my own life. This touches me deep down. Trustworthy. I trust this to tell the truth. We have life-enhancing, social interaction, or those like water cooler kind of options. And then there's personal timeout. So these are asked across all the different media that we measure within the Consumer Media Engagement Study. This specific slide looks at our media specific, our local dimensions. So we have 2 for TV, personal connection, TV near and dear, which is sort of that appointment television. Image impact for magazines, so all about the pictures. With internet, we have enjoyment and attraction, and interactivity and community. So interactivity are ones that kind of where the community is as much a part of the site, the content, the other visitors, as the site itself. There's also a set of statements here that don't actually map up to a particular dimension. These are just our other statements. They range from I get valuable information to this is relevant to me, it has a distinct personality, it inspires things, they're related. Now, the thing about all of these is that they're about the content, so about that particular program, network, magazine, or website. We also have what we call our ad attention and receptivity statements. And these are actually about the ads within the content. So there's 8 statements that look at the different ways that people are engaged with the ad messaging within the programming. So it ranges from everything from the serious, so products, services advertised on this are high quality, to the funny, ads on this entertain me, make me laugh. Depending on your message, the content, who you're trying to reach, some or all of these may be ones that would be really useful to you. Otherwise, some of them might not. So when putting together a media plan, which is what we're going to kind of do in this webinar, is we're going to take into consideration some of the elements that fall into this. So one of the things we want to look at here is the highest rated media, or the ones that get you the most of your audience. So that's one part. The second part is looking at the ones that get you the highest indexing, or the people who are more likely to watch that particular program, read that magazine, however we want to look at this. Financial considerations are always important. Being cost effective is definitely part of a plan. And then within the consumer media engagement study, we introduce another variable, the engagement part. So where your target is most engaged, both within the programming itself and also the ads within the programming. So the consumer media engagement study can help you improve media planning because you can drill down into the media choices for a particular target, making sure that you reach your target where they are and where they're most engaged with both the ads themselves and, again, that content in which those ads appear. So for this webinar, we're going to look at a pretty simplified use case regarding a healthcare pharma client who's looking to reach a group that we'll call trusting patients. So we'll look at how somebody building this plan might use the consumer media engagement study to build it with cable TV and magazines to effectively reach and engage their target audience. So Simmons has a series of health and well-being segments that are clustered based on their health attitudinal and behavioral characteristics. For the sample use case here, we're going to use this trusting patients one. It's a hypothetical pharma healthcare company who's looking to reach this trusting patients target. As research has determined, they are likely to be the most profitable group of consumers. So a little bit about our trusting patients. They rely on doctors. They rely on modern medicine. They practice a healthy lifestyle. They're older. They take an active role in managing their health. They seek out health information, and they purchase fresh and natural ingredients. You can see by the demos up there on the top right, they tend to be older, so maybe they're retired, working part-time, not a really high household income, but most of them are homeowners and more than half are married. So this is a word cloud of the statements, the agree-a-lot attitudes about health that they over-index for. And I think this kind of brings out a little bit about who they really are and what's important to them. So we can see that health, doctor, prescription, medication, information, benefits, those are words that resonate with our trusting patients segment. Another interesting thing to know about them is their highest indexing statement at 222 versus all adults is normally, I only use drug brands that are recommended by my physician. It's a useful thing to know when talking about messaging to this particular group. Our trusting patients are also more likely to have regular medical checkups, frequently take preventative medicine, and eat a healthy, balanced diet. The coolest thing I noticed about this group is that a really strong statement for them is, I'll pay just about anything when it concerns my health. So for the first part of this exercise, we're going to start with some really overly basic cable TV network planning. So what we're doing is on the left side here, looking at the top cable networks by reach. So those are the ones that are going to get us the bulk of our audience here, right? So we get a lot of our people watching these networks. On the right side, we have the top cable networks by index. So those are more likely to be watched by our trusting patients than the average adult. Now, some of the shows or networks on the right are not that surprising on the left are not that surprising as they're pretty persuasive throughout the whole US. Where we get a little more insight is to the ones on the left. Oh, geez, I don't know my left from my right. On the right, which kind of gives a little more insight into their brain. So they like cooking, they like movies, they like OWN. But these together, we can see that there's three that span both, Hallmark, CNN, Weather Channel. And what's really interesting is that they kind of cover the news from one extreme to the other. We have Fox News, we have CNN, we have MSNBC. And really, who isn't watching the Weather Channel these days, right? So to really drill down to find our ideal targets for our health-related advertising, we're going to jump back into these ad attention and receptivity statements. So just to remind you of what they all are, we're going to kind of see where these sort of overlap and where they pop for those networks that we were looking at. So depending on the target, again, and your message, some of these may be more appropriate for a specific target than others. In our case, if we're looking for healthcare pharma, we're probably going to lean towards some of the serious ones that ads on this entertain me, make me laugh may not be quite so appropriate. Then again, if you're Aflac and you want somebody to laugh at the duck, that's going to be a really important statement for you. So now let's take a look at the different ways that our trusting patients can be engaged with advertising within the networks we're looking at. So first, just to let you know what the set of networks that we chose here, we're looking at all the ad-supported cable networks that are non-kid and teen. So we have 73 total networks here, and for all the little images I'm going to show, they're going to be the top 25, and we highlighted the ones that were in, that we pulled out, those 17 networks that we pulled out before. Now, one more bit of explanation before we dive too deep into this is that the index in the Consumer Media Engagement study is calculated a little bit differently. So usually it's like, all right, we're comparing this particular thing to our base, which is generally adults 18 plus, men, women. In this case, what we do is the competitive set that we create, we get a weighted average for that particular competitive set. So for all our ad-supported cable, non-kid and teen networks, the media average for this particular question, ads on this help me make purchase decision, is 18%. Our index then takes our percentage for our particular network. So for OWN TV, 30% of our trusting patients who watch OWN TV say that ads on this help me make purchase decisions. Now, compared to the media average of 18%, that gives that an index of 168. So that's how those indices are actually calculated. So let's move on to our next statement. I am more likely to buy products and ads on this. You can see there's a couple more networks in this group. And again, our media average there down there at the bottom says that it's 18%. So Velocity at 33 has an index of 184. I often pay attention to the ads on this. So there with Cooking Channel has 36% of our trusting patients who watch Cooking Channel say that they often pay attention to the ads on Cooking Channel. And the last one on this page, I get valuable information from the ads on this. Now this group of our trusting patients seems to be a pretty info-seeking kind of group. So the fact that more of our networks pop up here in the top 25 and that our numbers are a little bit higher seems to indicate that this statement actually probably would work really well for the part of that plan. So since we have 8 of these ad attention receptivities, we'll go through the next 4. Ads on this fit in well with the content. So they're looking for ads that kind of flow with what's going on. This has ads about things I care about. This one has a whole lot in here. We have 7 of our 17 networks. With Cooking Channel ranking number 2, 39% of our trusting patients who watch Cooking Channel say this has ads about things I care about, which makes sense. They're really into being healthy and healthy food. Products and services advertised are high quality. We have 4 of our networks in here. So this group doesn't have a whole lot of money. They're really interested in paying more for better health care, but maybe not so much with this particular statement. And then ads on this entertain me and make me laugh. Like we said, this probably isn't the best fit for our trusting patients, but it's still worth running just to see how that actually works. So there's another way we can look at how engaged our audience is with our target networks. What we did here is sort of creating an average across all 8 of our ad attention and receptivity statements. So that top row, again, that's all of our ad attention or all of our ad-supported non-kid and teen cable networks. And then we pulled out those 17 networks that we wanted to look at from the beginning to see how they ranked and rated compared with all of everything together. Now you can do the average across all 8 of these statements, or if you decide that maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, however many of them are the ones that are most applicable to what you're trying to do with this particular piece of data, then you can pull those out and just do an average across a few of them. So we took an index, that last column on the right, comparing each of these, that average, to the overall, and we can see we have 6 networks that do well across this. Again, there's the possibility of kind of doing a little mix and match here and seeing how you want to work with which particular statements. So we also have a number of other engagement statements around the content of the programming. So I mentioned earlier that we could consider a halo effect with our advertising within the content if the content is sensitive to a particular dimension or statement or combination thereof. So let's take a look at some of these. Now, trustworthy, our group themselves are called trusting patients. So trustworthy is obviously something that really resonates with them. And as you can see from the amount of color on here, we have more networks that actually move up in the ranking when we're talking about trustworthy in terms of programming. So I trust this to tell the truth. I don't worry about accuracy with this. This does not sensationalize things. Again, maybe trust this to tell the truth is more important, sensationalize not so much. You don't have to use every single thing here. You can pick out the ones that really work for what you're trying to get across. Life enhancing may also be important to this group. So this gets me to try new things, provides info that helps me make decisions, or it's a way to learn about new products. You know, if it's a brand new product introduction, you know, maybe getting it out there on the cooking channel will help kind of build that brand for you. Pulled out a couple of our other statements, so I get valuable information. This inspires me to buy things. This is relevant to me. You can see the ones on both sides have a little bit more purple than that one in the middle, so those might be actually a little more relevant for this target and this group of networks. Now, with the Consumer Media Engagement Study, you can create your own competitive set. I pulled all, ad-supported cable TV, non-kid and teen networks, and that's what we're looking at on the left side here. So you can see the media average, and we can see how our networks ranked within that group of all 73 networks. Now, on the right side of this, I created a new competitive set, which is just using those 17 networks that we started out with to see how they do within each of those. So what you can see is the percentages are the same. For OWN, it's 30% on both. WGN has 25 on both. But what changes, because that media average has changed, we're looking at a completely different set of networks. So that media average changed, thus the index changes, and then the ranking will obviously change because we're looking at 17 versus 73 networks. So what you could do with this is really create, if you want to look at just women cable networks, you can do that. If you want to look at sports cable networks, you can do that. News networks, any way you want to kind of divide and conquer and create that competitive set so that you can figure out exactly what works for your particular plan, you can do that. So now that we've kind of covered the cable TV part of this, I'm going to do a really quick drive through a similar exercise with magazines, only I'm kind of going to do this in reverse. So we're not going to go into as much depth because it's mostly the same questions that we looked at before, but this will give you an idea of the publications that we might want to use to reach those trusted patients, albeit from a slightly different angle, starting with the Consumer Media Engagement Study to see where our target trusted patients are most engaged with magazines. So the spreadsheet looks a little familiar. We have our add attention and receptivity questions across the top with that average at the end and the index to that average on the side. And now this is looking at all the magazines we measure, approximately 100 titles, and then sorted by that index. Now, if something is more relevant to you, ads in this fit in well with the articles, we'd want to go back and sort by that third column and see which ones pop there. But it's interesting, like some of these, you might think they're kind of unlikely to be the best fit for this trusting patients and our pharma, but there might be some surprises in there here that might get your ads some new eyeballs that you really weren't anticipating. So we can do the same exercise again with our trustworthy and our life-enhancing statements and see what kind of pops up to the top. One of the things I thought was interesting that I kept seeing was the family handyman. So if our group of trusting patients seem to be mostly retired, maybe they have that time to kind of putter around the house. We see Weight Watchers, we see Cooking Light, we see This Old House. So those are the kind of things that are interesting to them that may not have originally been in the plan. So here, again, we're looking at those other statements. So valuable info, one of my favorites. This is relevant to me. Interesting that This Old House is in there, as is the family handyman. We have Weight Watchers again, men's health, men's fitness. On the right side, I wanted to pull out and look at that local dimension. So the local dimension for image impact. So this is all talking about the pictures. Now, not extremely relevant, most likely for this particular target, but it's interesting to see what does pop for them. So out of our trusting patients, 74% who read Nat Geo Traveler say I look at the pictures and think, wow, which is way up there at the top compared with everything else. But that's how you can use sort of those local dimensions, local statements that are specific to a particular medium. So doing that whole choose your competitive set thing, I kind of worked it backwards here. So I started out with looking at things that were focused on health and fitness and weight and cooking, things that would probably be what we would think would be the best target for this. And you can see how some of these move around differently. Like if this has ads about things I care about up there in the top left, shape, health, men's fitness. If you go down to, I look at most of the ads in this, Weight Watchers is up at the top. Go straight up from there, I get valuable information from the ads in this, prevention moves way up to the top. So if you're setting a smaller creative set, you can kind of see how the mindset behind like what these trusted patients are thinking when they're looking at ads and magazines. Now, another hint, when you're creating a competitive set, because this is the Consumer Media Engagement Study, we can look across media too, as long as you're using those global questions or those global statements. So you could look at, if you were trying to find the best place to put cooking or some sort of food thing, you could look at cooking websites, cooking magazines, cooking programs, cooking networks, all those, and see kind of where the best place to put any particular ad would kind of fall out on that. So let me say, in summary, so we have some time to take some questions. The Consumer Media Engagement Study lets users delve into the why and how consumers are engaged with media. It's not just the numbers, but it's kind of getting behind what people are thinking when they're doing that. Creating specific consumer targets is easy. This is integrated with our National Consumer Study. So any target you create using those National Consumer Study variables can be moved in to look at engagement. And finally, insights from the Consumer Media Engagement Study add another level of depth to your media planning. So you can kind of dig in a little bit and not just know what they're doing, but why and how. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Allison.
Thanks, Jen. That was great. So right now we're going to answer a few questions from the audience as we've gotten them in. If you didn't get a chance or you do have a question now, please feel free to enter it in your question section of your GoToWebinar panel. So for our first question, how do you decide what properties to measure in the consumer media engagement?
So what we generally do is take a subset of what we measure in the National Consumer Study. We can't really measure every single thing, but we take a subset based on a combination of like how many people are using it. We also work with clients of the Consumer Media Engagement Studies. So if there are things that they want measured, we reach out to everybody that we do measure each time we do a new study, which is twice a year, and say, this is the subset of things that we measure in the NCS that we want to put in the MME. Would you like us to measure that, or is there something different that you want us to measure?
Perfect. Next question. What other media does CME measure?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
What other media does the Consumer Media Engagement measure?
Sorry, I had a little cutout right there. We measure TV networks, which is kind of what we went through there. We also measure TV programs and magazines, which we measure network. It goes into the web stream, but we measure the same set, a similar set of websites that you can also look this information for too.
All right. Next question. How do you collect consumer media engagement data?
So the Consumer Media Engagement Study is collected online. We do this twice a year. We're in field for about 4 months on each of those. It's a fairly in-depth study. For we have 4 modules for this. So what we do is everybody goes through the 4 modules and answers up to 5 on each of the modules. So there's 2 modules of TV, because we measure a lot more TV, but the networks and the programs. We have 1 module for magazines and 1 module for internet. So then we collect all that data and then we model it back in with the National Consumer Study data, so you're able to create those really versatile targets to look at engagement across.
All right, next question. You mentioned CME dimensions. Can you explain this term in a bit more depth?
Sure. So we go and we ask about the questionnaire itself actually asks response to the statements. So what we do after we collect all those responses to the statements is our stats team goes and does a factor analysis. And these statements roll up into these dimensions. So besides just looking at those statement scores, so those percentages of the top 2 boxes, we can also look at that overall ad attention and receptivity score, which is actually on a 100 to a 500 scale. So that's how they fall into those. We do this factor analysis, and those statements actually group up into those dimensions based on the factor analysis.
We have about 1 more minute, so this is an easy one. What is the sample size for the consumer media engagement?
Yes, that is a nice, easy one to end on. We survey about 15,000 people per wave, so that's twice a year. We have a spring and fall wave, and each of those over the 4 months that we're collecting, we get about 15,000 responses.
Perfect. We're at the top of our session here, so at this point, I'd like to thank our speaker, Jen Olson, and all of our attendees for joining today's session. Any unanswered questions will be addressed offline, and as a reminder, we will be emailing a copy of today's presentation within the next few business days, so keep a lookout from an email from us. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.